Obviously, this is a live event happening at 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time, but I do know that we have many people from attending who attend regularly from all places in the world where it is most certainly afternoon or evening in a lot of different places. So I think that's totally and completely appropriate. I'm Malcolm Hawker, host of the CDO Matters podcast, your host for this live event today. I am happy that you are joining me. I am also happy to be accompanied by my trusted sidekick in data, Mr. Ben Bourgeois. Ben, aloha.
Yeah, aloha. Yeah, good morning. It's 10:01
You're
a.m.
central.
here
That's right.
time down in New Orleans. So yeah, good morning. But I know we've got a lot of people overseas and across the world. So good afternoon, good morning, wherever you guys are.
Indeed. I just pivoted over a few minutes ago from another event that I was attending this morning from my friend, Mr. Samir Sharma, who's doing some workshops on data strategy, and that was awesome and beneficial.
Nice.
And I've got 1,001 things in my head, as usual. I do need to make a little disclaimer, though, a little bit of a technical gaffe. On my desktop, I have this docking station, which helps me have multiple monitors and manages power into my laptop and does a whole bunch of other magical things. But for whatever reason, it has a fan. I didn't even know it has a fan, but the fan is like kicked in on the docking station. So if you're hearing a kind of a background hiss with me, which is entirely possible, that's why. And I haven't figured out how to make the fan turn off other than not running my monitors for a couple of hours. So just an FYI, if you're hearing some background hiss, I apologize for that. It's not my microphone, it's my Dell laptop, and maybe I need some new tech. That's always a good motivation to get new stuff, right, Ben? It's like, you know, my stuff's broken. I need the latest and greatest of something, perhaps.
Yeah, you're gonna have like a 72-inch monitor before long. You're gonna have to
well, yeah. For anybody that's been following me for any length of time, and you know, over the last year since the creation of the CDO Matters podcast, and people may remember if you've been with me for a while, I had this neon sign. We had spent a decent amount of money to get like a Joe Rogan-esque like neon sign, and it's not actually neon. It's LED lights. And to make a long story short, it became the bane of my existence for several months because the light naturally flickers. LED lights are on, off, on, on. It's basically like an animation of light, just at a really, really fast speed. And your digital camera works the same way. It's capturing like it's called a frame rate. How many basically animations, how many stills it captures per second. And those things were out of sync. And I had every time I tried to use my neon light, it would create this throbbing, like, all up. So I don't have the neon light anymore. Ben and I have been talking about maybe getting different video platform because the one that we're using compresses the video down. And, you know, Ben and I both have reasonable cameras, but I think it's still being probably compressed down to at least 780, maybe even less. So,
yeah.
Technical things that we will continue to address here on our journey of the CDO Matters podcast and our live events online as well. So what do we got on the docket today, Ben?
On the docket today, well, Malcolm, we'll start with the most timely thing, right? So you spent most of last week over in Boston at CDO IQ, CDO IQ conference. Sorry?
I didn't. Nope. I just said, yes.
Yes, indeed. You know, you said this is the best event that you've been to for CDOs specifically, and it was great on networking. It was a real community event. You know, what was the overall feel of it? Is it different than it was in previous years? Has it changed? What's kind of a quick rundown of how that was last week?
Yeah, but hello from a few people who have already said hello from Atlanta and Chicago. Atlanta. Glad you guys could be joining. I was just, Ben and I were in Atlanta like 2 days ago doing some video stuff. CDO IQ. So great conference. It is the only conference that I'm aware of. There may be others, but it's the only kind of formal conference that is built for CDOs. There are smaller events. I know that Creminium, or I may not be saying that right, over in the UK does a few. Avanta does a few kind of smaller, more intimate gatherings for CDOs and senior executives here in the US. But in terms of like a full-on conference, this is the only one that I'm aware of that is focused specifically on CDOs. And historically has been actually on the MIT campus in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, kind of one of the more esteemed Ivy League schools here in the US, well known for high technology, and actually has professors, people there who focus on data and analytics, which is really, really cool. So there was this interesting connection between academia and the people that have coordinated that conference over these years. I mean, it's the 17th edition now, so it's been around a while. Dr. Richard Wang, who's a professor at MIT, and there are others like Dr. Michael Stonebreaker, also a professor at MIT, Tom Davenport, also a professor, and on and on. So you get these data professionals, and then you get academia, and then you get vendors, and you get a lot of people participating from government sector as well. That was one of my key takeaways. The number of people from government was rather remarkable. But you get them all together, and you bring them all together, and you talk about the things that matter to CDOs. And it's kind of like there was a trend going back a decade now to calling these like unconferences or non-conferences, where the conferences are being coordinated by the people. And this is one of the things that makes CDO IQ rather unique, is that the content is a function of the participants. The participants are creating these committees and these boards to identify like conference tracks, and then it's their participants that come up with the content. So it's not like this for-profit, conference entity that's coming up. It's actual, participants that drive the content. So you get a lot of content that is very timely, very relevant. And when you're there, it also, there's this kind of a strong sense of community because it's for CDOs and it's by CDOs. And yes, of course, there's vendors, and of course that there are these academics and others. But it's a great conference. I'm lucky to get to go every year. We actually Prophecy sponsored this year, so there was a little bit of a different dynamic in that we had a booth. So yeah, it was a great conference.
Awesome. Was it a lot of AI, a lot of concerns, excitement, discussion about AI, as I'm sure there has been kind of in the industry generally lately?
Yeah, of course. You can't, that's been the dominant theme of every conference that I've been at this year. However, at CDO IQ, I can say, and now this, of course, I couldn't be at every presentation all times, right? There was like 4 or 5 tracks, and each track would have 2 or 3. So I was only getting a snippet, but I went through the agenda, and I had conversations with people, all day, every day at the events. And kind of the key takeaway, the number one topic was actually not AI. I was blown away as I was watching this kind of unfold in real time when it was at the event. And it was, the number one topic was data products. That's the thing that people were talking about the most, which was really surprising to me, just given that it had kind of like, AI, everything was AI. And then all of a sudden I get to this one conference, and people were talking about data products and implementing data products and asking about data products and on and on. So it was interesting. A little bit of a breath of fresh air. I feel like, we went so hard and fast, and everybody had, was AI. So it was kind of actually a little refreshing to take a step back and talk about something that arguably was a little more practical, maybe.
Sure.
Yeah, let's not say AI isn't practical, but it was refreshing. So that was certainly the number one topic. There were other key takeaways. Yeah, kind of, right? I mean, I'd say it's an adaptation of blocking and tackling, and I've created a lot of content over the last year about data products, about data product management. I will have a kind of a key takeaway video coming out here shortly where I go into a little more detail on it. CDO Matters podcast, the latest episode that we just actually published last week was about data products. Talk about timely. So I've got a lot of content here, and I've got a lot of thoughts as usual. When it comes to me, I got a lot of thoughts. So it was good to see that. We can certainly dive into a little more detail in the conversation today if we want to, or if people have got specific questions about it. Good news is it's front of mind and it's being talked about. Less good news, I wouldn't call it bad because it's not bad, but some of the less good news, data professionals are wrestling with what it means, right? Data professionals are wrestling to understand, okay, how do I implement them? Why should I implement them? In a lot of the conversations I had, it seemed to be a little buzzwordy And
Right.
and when you press a little bit like as to the why, like okay, that's cool. Data products, right on. Why?
Mhm.
There was less substance there. Sometimes the answer is, well, we're implementing a data mesh. Okay, that one I get because data products are a fundamental pillar of the data mesh. Of the four pillars of the data mesh, that's one of them, data products.
Mhm.
So that one I got, but outside of a data mesh, it was we're implementing them, we're looking at them, but there wasn't a lot of like substance when it came to the here are the business outcomes that we are expecting to drive. Here are the specific problems
Right.
that we think that we're going to solve by implementing data products. So I would urge data leaders if they're thinking about this or they're talking about this, that's the first question you need to be able to answer. Like, and if you can't answer the why or the business benefit or the problem you're trying to solve by implementing data products, maybe you should take a step
Mhm.
back because there are specific things that you need to do in order to do data products. Number one being hire a product manager, implement product management into data management. And this is a unique skill set. Product managers are they're a separate role, right? There are people
Mhm.
that train, there's product management certifications, there are people that do this for a living. I
Mhm.
used to be one of them. I've hired and retained product managers. I was a chief product officer, so I know this world very, very well. And if you think that you could just take a data steward who is, or maybe a data administrator or a data manager, maybe somebody who's doing governance all day, every day, and just all of a sudden just say, okay, now you're a product manager. There's training that needs to happen there.
Sure.
So a lot more to talk about. There's a lot of goodness here. There's a lot of things to be excited about when it comes to data products, but just slapping a label on something doesn't mean much.
Yeah, exactly. And I've heard this just because, like you mentioned, it was the last episode of the podcast, and you really dug deep into it with some slides and some reference and everything. But like I think you mentioned, there's three things for it to actually be considered a data product. Like just kind of take a step back. Like what is a data product in definition, in your opinion? What does it have to
It's a good question. So data people, we like semantics, we like definitions, we like understanding nouns. Uh, so I've got a definition. But again, this is kind of falls into the good news, bad news category here. So I've certainly got one, and I think it's useful. But at the same time, it's not very specific by design. So to me, a data product would be a product or a service, or frankly, any solution provisioned by a data and analytics team that
Mhm.
is designed to solve a specific business problem that a business stakeholder or a customer would otherwise be willing to pay for. Right. So those are the kind of the three things. One is it's coming from a data and analytics organization, right? Like you as a data and analytics team are creating a solution for a business stakeholder that has a specific problem that needs to be solved. Right. So there's a thing, there's a product, and we can have an academic discussion of whether they're products or services. Frankly,
Sure.
most of the time, they're probably actually services by technical definitions, because often you won't actually own anything. There's
Right.
no, like,
You
you don't have physical, tangible ownership of something. You're just kind of
right.
licensing use of it, or gaining use of it, which is aligns more to what we would call a service. But that's kind of concept number one. Concept number two is it's for customers and it's solving a problem. If it's not solving a problem, it's not a product, right? It's got to solve a specific problem. And number three, it has to be something that people would be willing to pay for. It
Right.
has to have value, and it has to have quantified value. So if people aren't willing to pay for it, well, then it's not a product, right? So if you've got dashboards out there that nobody's ever used, or you've got APIs, or you've got schemas or tables or a bunch of data sitting somewhere in a data warehouse that nobody has ever used,
Right. Probably not a
uh,
data product.
I don't think that's a product, right? Because clearly you've missed the mark. It's not solving a problem because it can't be solving a problem because it's never being used, or people don't want to pay for it. If people don't want to pay for it, well, then it has no value, and then it's not a product. So again, the good news is we have a definition. The bad news is it's kind of squishy.
Yeah.
Um, just about anything technically could be a data product, an API, a schema, a dashboard. right? An entire table could be a data product. A data marketplace could be a data product, right? A file of data could be an Excel spreadsheet could be a data product. So that causes a lot of consternation for data people, like the idea that there's no hard and fast and it must be this. Data people are really prone to start to try to break things into component pieces, and are prone, and I see this on LinkedIn every day, where people spend a lot of time trying to break down like the component parts, right? Like it's the phylum, genus, subgenus, subphylum, like pick your metaphor, but like going all the way down to the smallest little chunk. And it's kind of a self-defeating exercise, because like, what does that do? Like, what does that buy you? If somebody's willing to pay for it at any one of those levels, well, then that's the product. And you know, this my iPhone has got a ton of components in it that could be products on their own. And the components have subcomponents that could be products on their own, and on and on and on. But getting into these hair splitty arguments about, well, what's the product, and you know, how could I componentize things to make new products out of sub products or sub, you know, I don't see the benefit there. It's just, if somebody's willing to pay for it, then it's a product. Some of the presentations at CDO IQ were actually really good about this, because you know, you had companies that are like Fortune 500s, where they were saying,
it was from Vistaprint, right? It was Sebastian Claptor.
Oh, that was awesome. Yeah, Vistaprint, the CDO from Vistaprint, he gave an amazing presentation on kind of their journey to a data product world. That was awesome. But there were other presentations as well, where they're, you know, you're talking about these massive companies, like with probably data and analytics teams of hundreds of people, where they said, yeah, we have 150 products, right? Like that's it, right? So, you know, I think I'm not entirely sure how beneficial it is to you know, rack your brain for days and days and days trying to get this very specific thing about what a product is or what a product isn't. Really, it's all about identifying value. It's about identifying the problems that you're solving, and then building something to solve for the problem. And that's what it is. And the magic happens when you start applying product management as a discipline to that process.
Yeah.
Because what product management would say is, well, there's a few things, right? Number one, you've got to intimately understand your customer needs, intimately understand your requirements, right? Product management would also say, what about the user experience? What about design, usability, right? Like, if you put this dashboard in front of somebody, would they be able to use it on day one, right? Could we even be doing some usability studies, and maybe even doing some A/B testing of different types of dashboards to find which one was more usable and which one was more intuitive, easy to use,
before you even publish it? Yeah,
exactly, right? Like, this is the kind of a mindset that a product manager would bring to it. They would also do stuff like cost effectiveness, feasibility, getting back to the price. Well, how much does it cost to make, and how much people would be willing to pay for it? Like, holy cow, ROI, right? Like, in the data world, we've been talking about that forever. What's the ROI? I don't know. That's impossible. That's impossible. We can't do that. Well, no, it's possible. Because if you're solving a problem and people are willing to pay for it, then you ask, what are you willing to pay for it? Now, I understand that's a difficult question in most organizations, because the mechanisms to pay, you know, department A, department B may not be there, or in some form they may be there in like allocations, like budget allocations every year, or some sort of chargeback mechanism, maybe. So for some companies, these mechanisms may actually be there, right? But my point being is that a product manager would look at it, and for any one product, it would have to be profitable. At the very least, it would be bringing in as much as it costs. And if it doesn't create as much value as it costs, then why would we do it?
Why are we still doing it?
And on and on. So cost, pricing, right? Then there is go to market, right? Okay, well, we'll build in this product development, working with the product. So roadmap, timelines, right? Managing requirements, defining requirements, build out. So building the thing, working with engineers to build the thing, working with data engineers to build the thing. Product manager would be at that. They would be helping advise and guide data governance, right? Because this would go into the build, and what are the rules we need to put around this thing? Who can access it? Who can't access it? So they would be heavily informing data governance. They wouldn't own it, but they'd inform data governance. There'd be product lifecycle management. managing it through up and then through down, and maybe we actually archive it. There'd be back to go to market. There'd be end user training and enablement, right? There wouldn't be anything called data literacy because a product manager would never look at it that way. Product manager would never look at, well, we need to improve your literacy. The product manager would say, we need to make the most usable product, the most intuitive product that solves the product in the easiest way, and the one that in a way that speaks to our end users. Like, put all these things together. It's like, wow, that sounds great. That's what we need more of.
Yeah, and it just shows you the importance of the mindset and having customer centricity and kind of looking at it from that product management perspective, because a product manager of that mindset and that position would never say my product failed in the market because of a product illiteracy around what I'm trying to sell. Well, no, if your product isn't working, if nobody's adopting it, nobody understands what it solves or what it's for, and they're not willing to pay for it, it's a problem with the product. Kind of looking at data management that exact same way.
This is, you just teed up. You just basically summarized the presentation I'm going to start giving in December. The first time I'll give it will be at the DGIQ conference, East Coast DGIQ. So this is the conference hosted by Dataversity that is held December 5th, I think, the first week of December in Washington, D.C. So I'll give a presentation there titled The Problems with Data Literacy. And you've heard me probably go on these rants before. I will do it again and again and again. But the underlying premise of data literacy, and this is according to the book titled Be Data Literate by Jordan Morrow, one of the nicest human beings you'll ever want to meet. But that book clearly says the kind of the underlying premise of data literacy. Data literacy was born as a thing out of the belief that a skills gap is holding users back from realizing value from data. Now, I know this is true. This is most certainly true, right? And we need to train our users. We need to help enable them to get value from data. We need them to know the right tool for the right job, and on and on. So there is most certainly, of course, there's a training aspect here with anything that we do, whether we take a data product view or not, there's a training aspect. But if people aren't using the product, or if they're struggling to use the product, the first question you need to ask is, are we meeting your needs? Are the requirements fit for the problem you're trying to solve? Is this product inherently usable? Is it intuitive? Is it nicely designed, right? Ask those questions first. And if the answer is yes, 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 and they still don't want to use it, or they still can't use it, well, maybe then we need to look at, okay, what did we miss in training, right? What ball did we drop from a training and an enablement perspective? And maybe then we need to start looking at what would otherwise be called literacy, but I would never call it that, because that's an incendiary term. It's a tough way to start a conversation with somebody by suggesting, hey, you may be illiterate. I do see a question that our friend Garanga has asked. What's your view on adaptability and feasibility for data? My view on adaptability and feasibility for data. I'm not entirely sure what you mean, Garanga. If you could maybe reframe the question, that would be great. I mean, adaptability of data. I mean, a common theme that I've been sharing these days through a lot of my posts, and as a matter of fact, even kind of a guiding principle of how we're marketing, a prophecy these days is the idea of adaptability. In the world of data management, to me, what adaptability really, really means is that context matters, right? That in data. So we've long known that the quality of marketing data is different than the quality of finance data, right? The rules that would be appropriate for a marketing use of data are different than the rules that would be appropriate for a finance or legal or compliance view of data. We've always known this. It's always been inherently true. Those are two different contexts, two different purposes, two different uses of data. Now, when it comes to adaptability, what that means is that you need to have governance processes, quality processes, MDM processes, even integration patterns, I would argue, that could be highly adaptive and can take context into consideration and basically say, hey, we can have two sets of governance rules here. maybe actually even a third or a fourth set of governance rules, one for marketing, one for finance, and another one maybe even for more of a CEO level. So the way that I look at this within most large organizations is that there's really kind of three levels of business rules or governance policies, I would argue. Right at the lowest level, you are at a functional level: sales, marketing, finance, right? And this is where rules can be highly function specific. The business rules that exist in a CRM, for example, are the data governance policies that are managing data in a CRM. Let's just take a customer record in a CRM, for example. You could have 200 fields on a customer record in Salesforce. 190 of those, most people don't care about. They're only relevant to sales, right? They're whatever sales wants to track on an opportunity. Go for it, sales. Make your own rules. Nobody cares. It only lives in Salesforce, right? So that's kind of the lowest level. That's the sales context. Well, up one level is cross-functional, where maybe sales needs to sell something and you've got a contract or an opportunity that becomes a contract, and then that contract needs to move from Salesforce to an ERP so you can start recognizing revenue. That's when you need to start having some commonality in those rules, right? There could even be a third level up, more of an enterprise-wide level, right? Where you need consistency across the entire organization, where you need that single definition, that single view, maybe that one gold master record. But you can have different rules at each of those levels. And that's really what I mean by adaptability, is that your governance program or your MDM software, your data quality software should adapt and should be able to adapt to those different contexts in data. This is one of the things that graph databases, knowledge graphs are quite good at. They're not the only tool to help here, of course. Modern adaptive MDM platforms can help do this as well, and adaptive data quality platforms can help do this as well. But when it comes to adaptability, the idea here is to think of, okay, context matters, and how data is being used matters, or how it's being created can matter, and you can have different rules for different use cases. It's totally okay. Kind of a different way of thinking about things. In the world of MDM, really what this means is that you can have multiple versions of the truth, depending on what lens you apply. If you're a CEO, then there's only one version of the truth. Hard stop. If your CEO asks, how many customers do we have? There's only one answer. But at a functional level, maybe there could be multiple answers or multiple definitions or multiple versions of the truth. That's really what it means to be adaptive when it comes to data. So hopefully that kind of answered the question. That's at least my perspective. If I didn't, please ask. Feel free to ask again.
Yeah, we are of course on Goldcast here, playing live. We are also on LinkedIn Live, and Malcolm, we had a couple people say hello, wave at us from LinkedIn. Natalia Katova, hello.
Awesome.
How are you? And I may or may not mispronounce this, but Jashankar Vishkawarma, hello from LinkedIn as well.
Awesome.
We got a few people
awesome.
saying hello.
Awesome.
A few people live on LinkedIn.
So this takes a village to pull these events off. So I have Ben, and I also have a producer, Haley, who's offline, managing kind of the LinkedIn experience here. So I'm not purposely trying to ignore anybody in LinkedIn. If you are joining through LinkedIn, thank you. It's just having we do know actually that our video platform is ahead of LinkedIn, and trying to keep track of those two worlds would probably make my head want to explode. So I'm thankful for our small village here at Prophecy that's making all this possible. But great that you could be joining from LinkedIn. That was the goal. Glad to see it's working.
Yeah. So Malcolm, we taking it back to CDO IQ a bit.
Yeah.
This is a CDO centric audience, a CDO focused content. You live in that world a lot. We're always talking about the challenges CDOs have, what they're trying to do better, how they're trying to improve the organization, what they need to do to get there. But I like that you shared some thoughts on LinkedIn about a panel discussion at CDO IQ hosted by Randy Bean that was just about what are some of the most successful things CDOs have done, what are some challenges they've recently gotten through. What were some of the takeaways from that and some of the things you heard?
There was a lot there. And there's no one size fits all, but there's a few common themes, right? One of the things that CDOs really wrestle with is how to align better to the business, right? How do we better align data and analytics functions to business functions? So, there's a lot of different ways to do that. There are a lot of CDO organizations that are kind of creating centers of excellence that sit outside of IT, where the CDO is its own entity outside of IT, maybe reporting to a CEO even. So that's one thing that we heard from one of the panelists. I know for a fact there are many others that are looking at, maybe things like some sort of quasi data mesh architecture. Now, this is kind of a bit of technical centric architecture, but the idea being decentralization, right? To put data and analytics functions within each of the business units, which is something I've done in my past with a varying degree of success. I mean, I think there's a lot of goodness there. Certainly what the mesh requires actually is to have data and analytics functions, or at the very least analytics functions, within various business units. So that was certainly, one of the themes. Data culture was another huge theme as well, right? Front of mind for a lot of CDOs. And how do you get more of a data-driven culture? Now, if you've followed me for a while, you may know that I have a little bit of an antibody response to the idea of being data-driven. Really, when I hear that, what I hear in my mind is that we wish we had businesses that were using facts to make decisions. Right? Like that's what I think a CEO would think if she or he was saying we need to be data-driven, right? If I heard a CEO say that, I would assume, oh, okay, this is about using facts to make decisions, and that facts should inform everything that we do. And I think that's for most organizations, that's the business view of being data-driven, and nobody's going to argue with that, right? Like nobody's going to say, I'd rather go with intuition. Yeah. Right. Like you can take the facts. We're going to roll with it. Right. Nobody's going to say that. Right. Everybody's going to say we're going to be data driven. So it's kind of like world peace, right? Who's going to argue with world peace? Right. So, however, my gripe about data driven, and this does tie back to this issue of culture. My gripe with data driven is that I think that within the data and analytics world, when we say that, we have a slightly different, more egocentric, potentially, view of the world, that we should be the one driving the business, right? And yes, data should be driving the business, but we as data and analytics organization and data people shouldn't necessarily be driving the business. The business should be driving the business. We play a support role here. The business drives, we enable, we support. And this idea that the world could kind of turn on itself and say, well, now we're the center of the world. I think from a culture perspective, that could be problematic, right? Because I think that would cause us to have less humility. I think that would cause us to be less sympathetic. I think that would cause us to listen less. I think that would cause us to speak before we listen. I think that there's a lot of knock-on effects from a culture perspective of being data-driven. So I talk about being product or customer driven, ultimately customer driven. I think that's the best way to go. But what I heard from the panels in Boston is kind of struggling with this idea of like data culture. What does that actually mean? How do I define it? How do we improve it? I know that I have problems, right? I know that we are not using facts for decision making. I know that I can't quantify the business outcomes associated with my investments in data. I know that we have some governance related challenges. I know that my business people are pushing back on governance. Meanwhile, I also know that my team internally is not as well connected to the business as it could be. So put all these things in a bow. I think culture is a huge issue, and I think we need to continue to talk about it. And I know that CDOs are struggling with it. And that's something that was on the panel discussion as well. On the last issue here is I'll just kind of tie off roughly on data strategy. Sure. And finding a balance between executing a strategy that typically is going to be 3 to 5 years. By definition, it should be, because it's not tactics, it's strategy, right? But also delivering short-term value, right? And how do we move the needle in the short term and take arguably more of an MVP or an agile type approach to deliver short-term value? And how do we find a balance between those two? Because there is a little bit of a conflict there. I could dive into each of those and obviously and talk for hours and hours, but those are some of the key themes. And I think, I think a lot of it does kind of tie into another theme that was kind of not spoken, but spoken was, increasing the credibility of the CDO role, increasing tenure of the CDO role, becoming more of a business advisor and consultant than an order taker.
Right.
And I think CDOs are kind of struggling. Many of them are kind of struggling to kind of assert their importance, as it were, within the organization. And this will be an ongoing topic in future CDO Matters podcasts. And how do we help facilitate that? Because I think that step number one is to take a step back and really revisit these culture issues and ask ourselves, are we really customer driven? Are we maniacally focused on the delivery of value, right? Are we humble, right? Do we put customer needs before ours? And I think when we start to look at some of these things, I think what we may see is that it's time for a bit of a reset in the world of data and analytics. And it's time for some different perspectives. And it's time to stop doing things like blaming data quality, which drives me nuts. I had a post on LinkedIn last week, these sound bites about, 80% of data scientists' time is wasted because of data quality issues. No, it's not. These aren't data quality issues. There are some data quality issues that are very real, right? And we can look across the traditional dimensions of data quality if we want. There are lots of them, depending on who you ask, maybe even up to 12: uniqueness, timeliness, accuracy, completeness. There are others. There are ways to measure data quality, but the soundbite of 80% of a data scientist time wasted, it's not that. It's on standardizing, normalizing, concatenating, dealing with different database structures, different semantics, definitions, and on and on and on. So, data quality issues are most certainly real. I've looked at data in most CRM systems and it doesn't look good. I get it. But at the same time, saying, we've another soundbite. One of the responses on my LinkedIn post was that 3% of data meets minimum data quality standards. My response to that was, well, then how are our businesses even running?
Right.
How
are we taking orders?
How is it even how is it even possible that I'm my computer booted up, right? When I think about this stuff, Ben, what I'm starting to think when it comes to culture, and this does tie back to the question about the conversations of CDOs in the last conference. When I think about culture and I think about data quality and I think about some of these struggles, it's like what I'm seeing is that we talk a lot about data quality. Data quality is bad. Data quality is bad. Data quality is bad. When in reality, not always, but a lot. The data that we are calling low quality was simply optimized for a different use case.
It was fit for purpose in the system it originated in, or
charades. Yes.
Right.
Yes. It was optimized for an operational use case, not an analytical use case.
Right.
But when we in the data and analytics team sit back and say, that's low quality, shame on you, business, and wave fingers about bad data. Some of it is bad. I know this. Some of it is bad. But when we sit back and say things like 3% meets minimum quality standards, or 80% of data scientist time is being wasted, or on and on and on, you could Google. There's no shortage of these sound bites talking about how much time we as data people waste because of poor quality. When we do that, I think it creates this boundary, but like an us and them, right? And it creates the finger waving and the blaming, and I think there's a similar vibe here in when we talk about data literacy and the finger waving and you poor illiterate sods that don't know how to use data.
Yeah.
Well, they're still issuing invoices. They're still recognizing revenue. They're still sending emails to customers. They're still creating products. They're still procuring goods. Somehow, some way, our businesses are running. In many ways, like really well.
Yeah, and in a revenue generating function of the business, and not necessarily, because I would say, more of a
Yeah.
cost center in IT and CDO.
Now, I mean, are there ways that the business could make our lives easier? Of course, right? But I think to the culture issue, we need to get away from the finger waving and the blaming and the us and them and the I just do the water or I just do the pipes, I don't do the water.
Right.
Sorry, my screensaver kicked in.
I imagine it's like some nice slow moving clouds, or is it something relaxing?
No, it's like the standard. I'm back. Pet peeve on Goldcast. No, it's the I don't. It's like an ice cave. It's like one of the Microsoft the standard photos. I think it's an ice cave somewhere, like in Iceland or something. But anyway, all right. That's my bit on data culture. Front of mind for a lot of CDOs, as it should be.
Yeah. So look, we'll tie it off on CDIQ. I had one last thing about it. I was not surprised, unfortunately, but one of the things you said is, on top of AI, on top of data products, on top of all these kind of hot new topics, people are still kind of struggling to actually translate data management into a business outcome. You said this is still a huge topic. This is something that feels, pervasive, and something I'm sure you've heard of these conferences 5, 10, 15 years ago. Why do you think that's so pervasive and still the hot topic? Is it just so core to what a CDO does that it'll never go away, or is it, or we're not learning the right lessons?
There's no one answer here. There's no one answer here, but I'm trying to piece it all together because I'll tell you, this is one of the reasons why I don't work at Gartner anymore. Was because I was a Gartner analyst for 3 years, telling people the best practices that they should be following in order to figure out how to, make a connection between investments in data and business outcomes. And 3 years, year one, I would give this message. 6 months in, I would give it. A year in, I would give it. 2 years would roll along. Hey, how's it going with building that, that business value framework that we talked about? No, not doing it. We're not doing it. Not doing it. So I was like, okay, well, is it the messenger? Is it the medium? Right. Or is it the message? And well, maybe it's the messenger. Maybe it was me.
Sure.
I don't know. I'm still open to that. I may be failing miserably at delivering the message. Is it the message? Well, no. We know when companies do things the right way, there's research after research after research that shows that companies that are able to do this, and by this I mean kind of value, quantifiably measure how investments in data, how improvements in data, how governance of data drives specific business outcomes. When they are able to do that, they outperform their peers. We measured this at Gartner. We did a CDO survey every year. We looked at this. We know that when you do these things, goodness happens. So certainly wasn't the message. So maybe the messenger, not the message. I landed on the medium. Maybe kind of being a Gartner analyst is just old school, and that to reach younger leaders in the space, I needed to do things differently, which led me to prophecy, which led me to doing exactly what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
But to the question, why do we still kind of struggle with some of the blocking and tackling? Well, one, there's a lot of different issues here. One just is organizational incentives, right? There is still a problem when it comes to incentives. Data leaders are not incentivized to get paid based on business outcomes. Higher level, there probably are some loose ties, and maybe 5, 10, 15% of your compensation is tied to overall business performance. But day in and day out, your paycheck is not a function of issuing invoices faster or driving down your supply costs or increasing your customer satisfaction, right? Data leaders, day in and day out, their meat and potato salary is not being, there's little connection there between, how they're incentivized and how the business performs beyond probably just annual business bonuses and that kind of thing. So incentives is a big one. 2, role ambiguity. The CDO role remains relatively new, and for a lot of organizations, they just don't get it still. And a lot of these roles are being written by HR folks, or being written by senior executives or C-level executives, and really don't understand the CDO role. So that's a problem. 3, I think, I would just call it leadership. I don't know a better word. Maybe it's individual development. The CDO role is most certainly a unicorn. You need what business leaders would call both a strategist and an operator. Like CTOs, these are operators, right? Traditional,
Sure.
these are operators, right? CEOs are more strategists, right? Are you commercially aligned? This is another way that the business people, they will use the word commercial to describe somebody who's a little more strategic, somebody who is more on the business side versus an operator, somebody who's tactical, get stuff done, right? CDOs need to be both, right? And this is a very, very tall order to get both the strategist and an operator, and maybe even a little bit more than that, right? Like maybe even a people person, maybe even kind of a team builder, consensus builder, communicator, right? So we're talking about a little bit of a unicorn here. I get it. And,
for sure.
Yeah. And so that's another reason, but also leadership. It takes a brave leader. I would argue it takes an extremely brave leader to walk out on that limb of that tree and say, I will tie my compensation, or I will bring visibility to this issue.
Mm-hmm.
I will tie my performance to business performance. I will tie the data team's performance to business performance. I will do that because there's a possibility that you will fail. Maybe, and yes, the truth remains is that the impacts of data are often once, twice, or third level removed from what you're doing in the data world. You'd call these things indirect impacts.
Yes.
So put all these things together, and we still struggle with this. We're still not doing it. And I mean, I get it, but I don't get it, because every time, and it's happened many times. I'd say probably a dozen. Every time I've ever put pen to paper with building business cases for large-scale data initiatives, whether that's MDM, whether that's data quality, whether that's data governance, every time I've done it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I've sat down with people in our finance organization, people who actually build these models for a living, every time I've done it, the numbers have been huge, right? And like, man, this is going to be a layup, right? If we got the model right here, this is going to be a layup. I've never had a situation where I've embarked on a data quality or MDM initiative where it's like, oh, man, this is only maybe a 15, 20% ROI here. This is, maybe we shouldn't do this. Maybe we could put the money somewhere else. Every time I've ever done it, the numbers have been massive. So
sure.
Anyway, lots more work to do there. And that's something I will continually talk about is, how important it is and why we should be focused there.
Absolutely. Well, another one thing I wanted to ask you about, you had a recent article in Forbes about data hoarding, right? So companies, they don't have data discovery, they don't have retention, they don't have archival policies. And I was kind of surprised in the article, as much as 50 to 90% of all enterprise data is considered dark data. And nobody analyzes it. Nobody's using it. It's not part of any business or operational process, and just the impact of that, right? I mean, a lot of this stuff is stored in a data center that, requires a lot of, carbon and energy and effort to keep running.
Yeah.
And environmental impact on that. Like, what's kind of your take on how we got here, and what's a way to get out of it?
I kind of stumbled on this last year. Excuse me. I kind of stumbled on this last year, and I was doing some thinking about this. And I think it was one of these sound bites of 90%. And take some of these numbers with a little bit of a grain of salt. Some of these metrics refer to IoT data. Some of these metrics refer to unstructured data, right? So just capturing of just a ton of unstructured data, maybe from sensors or from wherever. So there is more research, like academic quant research, that is desperately needed in this space. But by all consensus, I think there is a non-trivial material amount of data, and I know this just from my past, right? We as data leaders, we have this FOMO of maybe the business will need it one day.
Maybe we'll need it one day.
The worst thing that could happen is the business asks for that report and you can't generate it because you didn't have the data, right? So we that's the FOMO of not being able to generate the report. So we hoard it all. And storage costs have gone down.
Exactly.
Thanks, cloud.
It's an expected value proposition, right? It's like, well, it's just a little incremental cost in my cloud storage, which nobody really asked me about or looks into anyway. Or when the business comes and asks me for it, I say, "Oops, sorry, I threw it away," and I get
right. Or often this comes just kind of more simply in the form of requirements. You'll be talking to a business group. Business group is developing a new product or a new thing or a new workflow. And data people will ask, oh, well, do you think you need that data for reports? And business is going to say, yep, sure do. Rainy day fund. You never know. I may need it. I don't know. Let's go ahead and store it. Right. So, to make a long story short, it has been estimated by a couple of different groups now that, and again, more research is certainly needed. More research is certainly needed. The data center business. Okay, so is there data that is being stored outside of the world of data centers? Yeah, it's sitting on my laptop right now. I get it, but most of the volumes here are being stored in data centers, right? And by the three big providers. And there are estimates that say that they produce more greenhouse gas than the airline industry. Like, chew on that. Like, holy cow. But shouldn't be any surprise if you've ever flown to Washington Dulles and landed from the north, and you're flying over Ashburn, Virginia, or maybe you're flying into San Jose Airport from the north, and you're looking down at Mountain View and Santa Clara, mostly Santa Clara, and you look down and you're like, it's like these football field after football field after football field of data centers with like literally thousands of air conditioners on the roofs of these things. You get you'll know. I mean, okay, yeah, I get it. There's a lot of energy going into these things. So to make a long story short, we got a data hoarding problem. It comes back to governance. It comes back to, I would argue, ultimately, this kind of more product lifecycle approaches to managing data. Do we really, really need it? There was a presentation at the CDO IQ conference last week in Boston. A brilliant woman named Simone Steele gave who's based out of Switzerland, gave a presentation on this very topic. I think it is only a matter of time before CDOs and CIOs are given sustainability targets where their boards say, hey, I read this article by this dude named Malcolm Hawker and says that we got a problem with data. Maybe we can do some good for the planet here by just instituting some basic governance policies that say, if you don't touch it in 2 years, then just auto archive. Anyway, I think more thinking is needed here. I think it's time for us as an industry to start understanding what impacts that we have on the planet, because like we're one of the last. Like nobody's really kind of talking about this, and I think we should be. I do see a question from Christian Ordonez. Which software are flexible for data governance, MDM and data quality? Yeah, Christian, I get it. Thank you for the question. Try to avoid kind of getting into specific conversations about vendor. Yes, I work for a vendor. I get it. I think at a high level, you're going to have to make a choice. There's two approaches here. One is, do you look for a suite of solutions from a vendor that can do all of it, right? They can do MDM, data quality, data governance, data lineage, data integration, and on and on. And one well-known vendor in this space would be an Informatica. They've got everything. They do all of it, right? All of those pieces. Or do you take more of a best of breed approach where you have multiple vendors supporting specific functions, right? Where maybe, you have one vendor for MDM and you've got another one for data quality. Yeah. What I see and what I've seen as a Gartner analyst talking to literally thousands of companies is that over time, most large organizations have taken that best of breed approach, right? Have a data integration tool. They've got a data quality tool. They've got an MDM tool. Or maybe they've actually even got multiples of them. Some of those companies are revisiting and saying, do we need to have a single vendor here? And that's fine. But often a lot of those companies are remaining kind of taking more of a best of breed approach. The pivot to the cloud has kind of reset some of these conversations, right? Where a lot of companies that were okay with the best of breed approach in the past are now moving a lot of data management capabilities to the cloud and are asking, okay, can Amazon do this? Can Google do this? Can Microsoft do this? Quite frankly, the only one, and by this, what I mean is classic data management capabilities. You've got them here. These are data governance, MDM, data quality, plus integration. plus BI and analytics. That's the kind of the classic foundation of what would otherwise be known as data management capabilities, data management. A lot of people are asking, okay, can the cloud vendors do this? The only one that can check most of these boxes is Microsoft. The other cloud providers really can't. They're focused more on infrastructure, right? So core database management capabilities, data warehouse, data swamp, lake capabilities, that kind of thing. But when it comes to data management, these are applications. And the only one that's even really investing heavily and has got solutions that are viable in the space is Microsoft. So that's a kind of a third lens here is you need to be thinking about what your cloud strategy is. You need to be thinking about what your application strategy is. By applications, what I mean by data management applications, there's no one size fits all here. Yeah, hopefully that answers that. And I avoided getting into specific recommendations because that's not what the podcast's about.
Yeah,
Are there
I
other
guess.
questions? No other questions.
Not that I see.
We got 4 minutes, Ben. What nuggets of goodness are we gonna cram into 4 minutes?
Nuggets of goodness. I'll do some shameless promotion. We've got the very next episode. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I was taking some coffee, but yeah.
We've got the next episode of the CDO Matters podcast will be dropping later on today. You spoke with Tom Redman on his new book, People and Data, which ties into absolutely everything we're talking about here, right?
It does.
People and the training, the UAT, the customer centricity, the product management, these approaches, these are not barriers. These are not things that should bother a CDO. These are things that you should embrace and new things that you should, really shift your mindset and people focus and customer focus in data management.
Yep. Yeah. The conversation with Tom is a good one. I did read the book in its entirety. And by the way, if I'm on the podcast and I'm talking about a book, I will have read it because I'm not going to be one of these ones that just goes and shills. I actually want to read the book. It's a good one. Tom Redman is one of the great thinkers in the data and analytics space. He's a friend of mine. Has got a ton to offer in this book. So I would certainly, of course, recommend listening to the podcast. And the product management, I think you can look forward to a lot more content here from us at CDO Matters, from me, because I think there's a lot of goodness here, and I think when you talk about data products, but more importantly, data product management, and you start talking about some of these cultural issues, start talking about some of these roadblocks that have long hindered us. When you look at these things in their entirety, I think that the product management perspective here, not forgetting data strategy, incredibly important, right? Not forgetting some of the higher level things that we need to do, but when you put those things together, kind of culture and product management and customer centricity and user design and some of these, you start to put them together, I think that we can actually start steering towards a place where we actually start getting over some of these long held hurdles, like, data quality and maybe, data literacy and not doing business cases and some of these other things, because I honestly think there's a ton that we could learn from product management.
Absolutely. Well, I think that is a good place to end it. We are just about at time. We've got just under a minute here left. Thanks again, everybody, for joining CDO Matters live this month in July. Thanks for being flexible with us on a Thursday schedule. We're back on the standard Friday schedule, August 25th of next month. So we will be here each and every month sharing some insights from Malcolm here for you.
Awesome. I look forward to seeing everybody August 25th. Between now and then, be sure to check out content on the CDO Matters podcast itself, on prophecy.com, on YouTube, and of course on LinkedIn. If we're not connected, we most certainly should be connected on LinkedIn. I'm dropping nuggets of wisdom every day, generally every day, on LinkedIn about data management, best practices, data quality, MDM, you name it. Thank you so much for your support. I will see you again in another month. Bye, all.
Thanks.